But I came home from the doctor, came up the stairs, and fell through to the ground floor, which was a stone floor. And I couldn't get up. I thought I'd broken my back. So I laid there for 3 days.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where each week we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. Today's episode features one of the most remarkable stories I've come across in a long time. My guest is author, skydiver, globetrotter, and life cycle celebrant Lise Leroux. More than 3 decades ago, she received a terminal diagnosis. Then just 5 years ago, her story took a mind-blowing turn. I don't want to say any more than that, because you've got to hear the story from Lise's own lips in order to believe it. And for our life-affirming purposes here on Andrew Petty is Dying, hearing Lise's story from her own lips will strengthen your resolve to live with even more guts and gusto and abandon now. One little tidbit before we get into it. Listen for how Lise's story has led her to her unique purpose in life. In episode 3, How to Turn Your Imperfections into Superpowers, I pointed out that our story and our unique purpose are inseparable, and Lise is a perfect example of that. I hope her example will help you connect the dots between your story and your purpose even more clearly. This is so much fun to be live with you, Lise, in Kelowna, British Columbia, reaching across a border in 1,000 or so miles, I would guess. This is being recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's really encouraging just to have a conversation with you in another country, separated by miles, and to be able to look at each other and say, "Hey, we're doing okay." And it's a pleasure to be with you today. So we'll just jump in to your story because it's a truly fascinating one. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to share your time and share your story vulnerably in a way that we know will serve the listener and help us all embrace our mortality more courageously, more vigorously, so that we're living more fully and bringing our best into the world. And so jumping into your story, Lise, there are 2 major and very different chapters in your story so far. And I've intentionally not asked too many questions in our preliminary conversations about your story and it's been killing me because it's such a fascinating story, because I wanted to hear many of the details in real time with you right now, just like the listeners will be. And the first chapter of your story, as I understand it, began more than 3 decades ago with a devastating diagnosis. Set the stage for us. What happened?
Well, the main thing that did happen, which is marked very clearly in my mind because I really can't forget it. At 25, I was told, you have 6 months to live. Get your life in order. And that's something that when you're told at 25, you think it can't possibly. That has to be a joke. There's something wrong here. And I went and had multiple second, third, fourth, fifth opinions and was just told, no, get your life in order, 6 months. And the thing is, before that, the reason I got to that point and what exactly this meant and why I had this was, at 15, I started having issues. I started having pain. I started having things that were wrong, and I knew something was wrong. My parents took me to the doctor. The doctor said, nope, there is nothing wrong with her. She's a teenager. She obviously wants attention. She has a bit of scoliosis maybe, but I think she's a hypochondriac. So for 10 years, I went to doctor after doctor after doctor and then finally stopped because nobody believed me. My parents didn't believe me. And I just knew it was getting worse and worse and worse. And at 25, I started knowing that I didn't have much time left. I think you know within yourself that you have something that's going hideously wrong.
That was an internal knowing that you had prior to getting the diagnosis?
Yes, I knew there was something wrong. I had limited time. The pain, I was having pain in my neck and in my back. My right arm was going numb. I didn't know what was going on, but they kept saying, there's nothing. It's your imagination. that's a horrible thing to be doubting yourself and everyone is telling you you're lying.
Including your parents, you said.
Yeah,
Wow.
my family, who is supposed to be someone who supports me, and they did believe me. Looking back now, I was so angry at them for not believing me. But they tried. They did take me to doctors. But they believed the experts. So the thing is, at 25, I thought, well, that's it. I left my home. I packed up everything in a U-Haul. I was living in California at the time. I drove 3,000 miles because I heard that Montreal, which is in my hometown, I heard this was in 1985. I heard that there was this new test called an MRI that was being done there, and that there was this new surgery called a Harrington rod implant surgery, where for people who had scoliosis, that they would implant a steel rod in your spine, because that's what I thought was the problem. So I drove the 3,000 miles, I drove to the hospital, and I parked my U-Haul in the parking lot and went into emergency and presented myself. And they did tests, they did the MRI, and I am eternally grateful for the MRI because the doctor told me, he said, you have something called syringomyelia, which is a rare neurological disease, and it is a nasty one. And by the way, you need brain surgery tomorrow. And I was so delighted to have a diagnosis. I called my father that day in Montreal and I said, by the way, I'm actually here in Montreal and I'm 2 miles from where you live. I just want to let you know there is a reason for what I was telling you for the past 10 years. I have something wrong with me and there is surgery for it. They can do something about it. And by the way, I'm going to have brain surgery tomorrow.
And real quickly, at this point, had the doctors in Montreal told you that it was a 6 month prognosis, or was that not part of the story yet?
No,
Okay.
no, this is actually what happened. I had the surgery. I had the brain surgery. I was delighted. They shaved my head, which was not so delightful. The doctor didn't speak English that well, and I just made the assumption that this brain surgery would cure everything and that finally my life was back. I had kind of waited 10 years and it was back. But I went for the follow-up appointment and he said, I'm really sorry. We've stopped it for now. We've given you 6 months, but basically don't put things off, put your life in order. And I thought, this can't be true. This may be a misunderstanding of me not understanding his French. But he showed me there was a gray patch on the MRI and he said, look at the gray patch. This is proof. So again, you have 6 months to live. Just get your life in order. Most people, I don't know, maybe some people would be really great. Maybe they would be loving and, make better relationships with their family, get financially in order, do good things, do good deeds. But I was so angry. I was furious, that it had come back,
Mm.
that I had my life back, and then they were saying no. So I think the thing that was the worst for me was that it took my choice away again. I had waited and waited and waited, and they took it away. So I basically thought, well, the hell with you then. So I started to do very inappropriate things. I bought a motorcycle. I am afraid of motorcycles, so I bought one. I drove very fast. I'm afraid of speed. I don't even drive fast in my car. I drove inappropriately. I had inappropriate relationships. I stockpiled pills because I thought, well, I will actually make my choice. I will die when I want. So I tried to force it in a way, and I thought, okay, I'll have my pills in case I just don't want to wait any longer. And then I will just keep doing whatever I want. I will just stop doing anything. I don't want to do the expected. I don't want to go and sit at home and, wait for 6 months. So I kept on waiting And I kept on doing inappropriate things. I kept on telling people off. Um, I kept on spending money instead of saving it. Several years later, I thought, well, I really don't need to worry about any future here in Canada or the US. I will go ahead and do what I've always wanted to do. So I thought I've always wanted to go to the UK. So I thought, the heck with everything else. I left everything and I moved to the UK. And then I thought, well, I'm really afraid of heights. So this was kind of a thing. I was so afraid of everything that every time I would pick a fear, I would actually say, all right, I'm going to do something about it. So I thought, I'm afraid of heights. Okay, I will do a parachute jump, which is very stereotypical. A lot of people do parachute jumps. But I did one, and then I thought, I need to keep doing that because when I actually was up in the air and was falling, it was like the ultimate fuck you to death. It was like saying, ha, I choose. As you'd be falling, there would be a point when you needed to deploy your parachute. And so my hand would go down to the parachute, and then it would choose. I could not deploy it and keep going, or I can deploy it and live. And I started getting joy out of the living part of it. And I kept on doing this for 15 years. I did 600 parachute jumps, and every one of them I was afraid. I went up in the air and I was afraid because I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of my parachute not working. And every time I fell, when I deployed the parachute, I was like, okay, today I choose. I choose to live today. Maybe tomorrow I won't. So I even met someone who was another inappropriate relationship, probably. So I married him.
Can we pause that thought real quick? Because I want to jump in. I just am fascinated by so much in this story already. The piece that intrigues me is just that, like, it sounds like as a really visceral anger towards death. I wouldn't necessarily have known to expect that emotion from someone confronting their mortality. What was that about? Can you unpack that a little bit more?
I think what it was this. I felt like I was betrayed in some way. I felt like my body was betraying me, and I was being told I had to do something. I was not being given a choice. Because when you are young, you have so many options and choices and hopes for the future. I wanted to do so many things, and it was saying, no, you have to go. It's like now with the pandemic. No, stay at home. I was being told, no, stay at home. Stay and wait and just behave yourself and wait to die. And so this specter of death kind of was floating in front of me constantly. And I guess what I was doing was trying to deflect it in some way or show that I had some control over it. Because fear is a terrible thing if it controls you and pushes you into a really bad place. And the only way that I felt I could reclaim some power in choice was actually doing something to confront it. So I tried to confront it in probably the main things I was afraid of. Afraid of falling, afraid of death. Well, death was there, so I was like, all right then, death, come on in. And I choose to say hello to you or I choose not to. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
It does. It makes a lot of sense. Not because I have experienced it, of course, but it's a lot of what I'm hoping to help people do is to do exactly what you just said. Okay, death, come on in. Your hand was forced because you were given a 6-month prognosis, and the anger drove you to confront that fear and to assume what part of choice you felt you had left. And you've characterized a lot of that behavior as inappropriate. Another word that comes to mind for me is that you began to act with a level of abandon that you hadn't before.
yes. I stopped thinking of consequences.
And freedom, is freedom too positive a word?
I think it became freedom because I think at first it was about consequences as I thought, well, I'm normally a worrier about consequences. Oh, well, I can't do that because that will happen. But then when I had the ultimate consequence, well, you're going to die anyway, then I thought, this does give me freedom because even the ultimate consequence thing, jumping out of the airplane and facing death every day, it actually brought it closer. And then I stopped being afraid of it so much. And it gave me freedom to try things I never would have done. I never would have left everything and gone to the UK. I had no money. I didn't know anybody. I had no job. It was like, well, it doesn't matter. And I think that was the ultimate freedom is it's okay. It doesn't matter. Just do it. And that's probably the freedom that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth or overlay, like project my things onto your experience. I'm trying to tease out the nugget, like, because part of what we're trying to get at is what can we learn from your story that we can apply in our lives? Because probably 100% of us hearing your story will never be able to have that experience, nor would I would imagine you wish that on someone necessarily. What's the application there? How do you embrace death? You were forced to, and the choice that you made was to pull it closer rather than to reject it, which is interesting too, by the way, because you did have a choice in that moment. You could have gone home and waited for 6 months to expire and for you to pass, and just hunkered down and shuffled around in your slippers and your bathrobe and felt sorry for yourself. But this anger piece drove you out of that pattern, it sounds like.
Well, and it did. And I didn't understand it at the time. And I really was just reacting to the circumstances at the time. There were things that I only learned, I think, later. I think what I started doing during all this is I started acting very much in the moment. And when the fear would start creeping in, I would force it out by actually doing something that deflected the fear to something else. So I also started facing a lot of other fears, and this, it did start teaching me something, but I didn't, I think it's hard to know what you're learning until you look back.
Sure. Yep.
After I married, for example, we parachuted into our wedding. And, I think that was my 200th jump, and he had done about 2,000. And I unfortunately am not great with directions, so I landed in the wrong field. I missed a tree barely, and I landed in the wrong field on a sheep. And as I was coming down, I saw the sheep, and I thought, no, I'm afraid of landing on the sheep. I'm gonna kill the sheep. It'll kill me. And so I started screaming, move, move. Unfortunately, sheep don't look up. Okay, they only look side to side.
Oh, truly?
Yes, well, I didn't know that. I never came in above a
Oh,
sheep.
there you go. I didn't know that either.
They
Okay.
must have like articulated necks that go side to side. So the poor thing
Right.
probably heard this flapping and screaming thing.
And had never seen a human approaching it from above. So,
Exactly. So I landed on one, and it you know what a sheep would do when it's afraid. It shit all over the place. Okay. Basically, I landed in shit on my wedding day, and I had it in my hair, I had it in my nails,
oh my gosh.
I had it everywhere. I didn't the sheep and I stayed friends. But the thing is, it was actually wonderful because I don't think I ever would have done that had I not been afraid of jumping, of skydiving, of any of that. And I was told I was still waiting. I kept on waiting. I was still in that waiting mode, and I kept on and kept on. And then my health started deteriorating. So I thought, aha, it's coming.
Hmm.
It's getting there. So they said you have to stop jumping. So the one thing I had gained, which was facing my fear every day and having a control, they said I can't do it anymore because it's getting closer. So that brought the fear back of the death that was going to be happening imminently, which was now like 15, 20 years going on.
Right.
So I started writing. I wrote a book about skydiving and suicide because that's all I thought about was, okay, if I can't do that, I will take the choice back. The book, by the way, was really bad. Okay, it was called Parachutes Are My Downfall, and it was really badly written. And so obviously publishers rejected it. So for the next 5 years, I kept on because I was again afraid of rejection in a way too. So I kept on writing. I kept on trying to rewrite it and rewrite it. And it kept me busy not thinking about this 6 months. So 5 years later and 437 rejections later, it was published. I was trying so hard to have choices in my life, and the the book was the first one about suicide. Again, suicide's been something, it wasn't something I threatened. I didn't tell anyone that it was the main thought in my mind. I kept it there as a comfort that, if it gets too hard, this waiting, I have this option. I can withdraw on my own because the thing that was the worst thing was that they told me to wait 6 months. And they said, well, you will know when it's starting because you will become paralyzed from the neck down. So watch out when you get a sore throat. So whenever I had a cold or a sore throat, I thought, well, that's it. That's it. My paralysis. I'm going to die now. So I was living with watching out for a sore throat.
And this is how many years down the road now from the initial diagnosis? 15, 20 years down the road?
This was about 15, 20 years because this was when I was in my early 30s, when I was doing the skydiving and getting the book published. That was when I was 35. I finally gained, I felt, by facing the fear of rejection, facing the fear of death. I had found something I loved. I couldn't do it anymore.
Because there were still some health challenges that were occurring for you.
Well, yes, and I kept going back. I kept going to doctors. They kept showing me, look at the gray patch. It's spreading. It's coming. The MRI, I had so many MRIs over the years, and I saw so many neurologists. I saw spinal surgeons. I saw doctors, and they all told me, they started saying some of the same things. We don't know why and what is happening. Syringomyelia is a weird disease. Not many people have it. I think Johnny Cash's sister had it, I found out. But people die and they become paralyzed. It's a cyst in the spinal cord, and it's about paralysis through the body. So when I started having arm problems again, and I started having trouble walking and walking with a cane, and I rejected relationships. I didn't have children. I kept on waiting and wait. I bought a house actually at one point in the UK because I thought, well, it doesn't matter. I didn't have the money for the house, but it didn't matter. I thought it won't matter because 10 years from now I will be dead, so don't worry about it. Well, the problem was I did have problems financially, and I needed to try and get a builder to work on the house. And I thought, well, it doesn't matter that I don't trust the builder because it's that's the thing is I kind of worked with abandon, but then I allowed myself to trust people I shouldn't. I found out he was stealing from me at one point. I should have trusted my instinct because I was walking with a cane. I thought nobody would actually rip off a poor disabled woman. Anyway, they started stealing from me. I reported it to the police, and the builder started retaliating by breaking in the house when I was gone and actually booby trapping the house. So there was a floor joist. This was an old house in Wales at the time. And he moved the floor joist out of the floor joist hanger, which is something that holds the major joists. I don't know the terminology. But I came home from the doctor, came up the stairs, and fell through to the ground floor, which was a stone floor. And I couldn't get up. So I laid there for 3 days and couldn't get up, couldn't phone, couldn't do anything. And the funny thing is, I thought about my whole life kind of flashed through about 500 million times. And the only reason I didn't kind of give in to it was that I had these two little dogs at the time. And they stayed with me the entire time I lay there. I thought I'd broken my back. They lay there and I thought, well, I can't die for them. because, what would they do? And then I thought, well, what if they eat me when I dead, when I die? So it was a little bit weird. But the thing is, I had an ex-boyfriend who I had been telling about all of these things happening, and he kept trying to phone and phone and phone, and finally he drove 4 hours from London to where this was in Wales, banged on the window, and my dogs barked, and the police came, and the ambulance came, and I was in the hospital quite a long time, but this was kind of a turning point because I'd had a long time to think about all this waiting that I was doing. So I think the one thing that I did then is like, okay, I've lived through this one. I'm still waiting to die, but I've lived through this one. I can't jump anymore. I can't really walk. So I thought I've got to get ready to die because I thought this was when it was really coming because I couldn't walk. It was deteriorating much, much worse. So I gave away my home. I gave it away to someone. I gave away the money in my bank account. I found a home for my two dogs, which, that was probably the hardest. But I wanted them to have a home. So anyway, I took a really, really stupid job.
And Lise, just what made that? Obviously, you're close to your dogs. What made that the hardest?
Well, I had spent most of my life avoiding relationships because I didn't, it didn't seem right to have a relationship with someone that would only last 6 months. I didn't have children because I thought I couldn't. I'm dying anyway. All of these things I put off because I thought, well, there's no sense. So when I had these two little 4-pound dogs, it was like having children. And I think any mother, if they said, well, you're dying, so give your children away, and it was the ultimate thing that I thought I could do for them, which was to find a home for them instead of just be irresponsible and die and then have them be, I don't know. I thought I was doing the best thing I could.
Well, and at this point, you were beginning to acknowledge that the end really was coming after 20 some odd years of resisting it and telling it where to go and facing death and all that. It sounds like you were giving in a way that you hadn't up until that point. Is that accurate?
It was because I thought, okay, finally, and in a way I was kind of relieved, but part of it was horrible because I had gained so much. I had done things that I'd loved, and I loved my two dogs like they were children. People maybe don't understand that, but if you don't have children, women are maternal, and they were my family because I had pushed my family away too. So I was accepting the fact that finally, and it was a relief, finally I don't have to worry about it. I've waited a long time. So I actually took this ridiculous, stupid job and took a job and I ran away to sea. I took a job on a cruise ship. I was a training and development manager and then an HR manager for 1,200 crew members at a time on a ship floating around the world. And it sounded great, sun, sea, all that stuff, but I didn't actually get to have that. The passengers did. But we worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and we got out for about an hour every 2 weeks. But the weird thing was, I was on a cane when I first started and I could barely walk. But over the 4 months at a time, I started walking without the cane. It started loosening up. It started, all of a sudden, I was great. I felt better than I had in years. And so I'd go out to sea for 4 months, come back for 2 months, go out, and I did this for 6 years. And I thought, okay, this proves it. Hypochondriac. Because I'm not dying still. But the thing is, when I would go back to land, I would start seizing up again. I'd start having to use my cane again. I thought, absolutely, I'm a hypochondriac, but I'm still seeing all of the scans that are telling me I'm still dying. So I started doing the same thing I had been doing the previous 20 years. Everything that I was afraid of, I thought, well, I don't know what's happening. So if I'm afraid of swimming, I will sign up for swimming with whale sharks. So I can't swim. So I would jump out and try to flail around and beat that fear. So I was trying to bring more fears in. I'm afraid of public speaking. So I did a seminar for 1,500 crew members on harassment one day, which, every time I'd pull something in that I was afraid of and then I would do it. And for a moment, I would feel I have control. So over 6 years, I did this. And when I would come home, I would stay in people's living rooms because I didn't have a home anymore. I'd given it up. I had no money, nothing. So the thing was, when you go work on a cruise ship, you actually have medical reports and very, very thorough medical reports. And because they don't want anyone getting sick or dying on a cruise ship and having to be helicoptered off. So the thing is, one doctor, when I was back in Vancouver, called me in his office. This was 5 years ago. I am 59 now. I have been waiting and waiting and waiting. And he says, by the way, Lise, that diagnosis that you had at 25 was a mistake. It was wrong. That gray patch is not the creeping death that's coming to get you that you've been so afraid of. It was a mistake. It didn't mean I was healthy. I had something else. So what they told me I had was something called ankylosing spondylitis, which is a nasty disease. It's an autoimmune disease that basically your body is riddled with inflammation and it starts fusing together. The bones are inflamed. That's why I stopped being able to walk. That's why it loosened up when I worked on the ship. And the doctor said, it's a damn shame we couldn't diagnose this at 15, because that's the classic thing that people complain about at 15 is they start developing problems. And they said, it's a shame you might not have even had the brain surgery if we could have diagnosed it. So it was all a bloody mistake.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Can you pause for a moment and just, I mean, this is just blowing me away. I'm
Exactly.
imagining all the listeners like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't see that coming. So there's the 35-year chapter of dealing with impending death. And after the initial 6 months and you hadn't died, 20 or 25 6-month cycles come and go. And you have in and out health issues and you live with abandon and you live with, feeling suicidal and grasping for choice. And then this doctor tells you, actually, it wasn't that. It was never terminal. It's not pleasant and it can be painful and, really disruptive, but it's not going to kill you. Can you take yourself back, just pause and breathe and take yourself back to that moment when you heard that news? In your heart, in your mind, what happened? What were you feeling?
Well, the thing is that it was really, I don't know whether people will expect this. They said, great, you have your life back. Aren't you happy? I was absolutely angry again because I thought, how dare you? After this long that I have lived, not looking into the future, not preparing, not having relationships, not having children, all I thought was the things I hadn't done, and that I was so angry. And then I became afraid again because I thought, how am I going to live now? I'm a lot older. How am I going to live? I have no savings. I have no plan. I have no pension. I hadn't learned to live ahead of myself. All I had done was actually live for the moment. But then that's what they're telling us these days we need, more mindfulness, live in the present. But I was so, again, afraid. It brought back fear in a much different way. And people were like, don't you feel lucky? I wanted to smack them because how dare you think I felt lucky? I thought how, I was frustrated. This is really irritating that I now have to think of living again. I struggled for quite a few years after that.
Irritating that you have to think about living again.
Yes, it was so irritating. And now it's like, really? Are you kidding me? Now I have to switch my whole way of thinking. And I struggled with regrets and I struggled with how am I going to live with, because ankylosing spondylitis is quite painful. And I struggled with that. Do I want to live with this again? It brought back the whole suicide thing again of that choice. And so that's the main, I think, turning point for me in how I actually live now, because I had to think of what do I want in my life and what have I gained from the previous 50 years of living for the moment. So I left the cruise ship. I thought, no, that's not a permanent life. I need to start living, accepting the anger and trying to deal with it, accepting the fear again, and take some lessons with what I did gain from what I had been living with. So I started looking at what exactly do I want in my life now? And I started trying to think maybe not 10 years in the future. I started thinking of what could I do right now which would give me joy now? And maybe start thinking a little bit, maybe have a relationship, maybe, because I haven't had that. Um, Maybe I'm obviously too old to have a child, but I did rescue a little Mexican rescue dog who
Do you speak Spanish?
absolutely not. And we have had discussions, my dog and I. Do not pee in the house.
Gotcha.
No comprendo.
Wasn't his fault.
Exactly.
Real briefly, Lise, I just want to tell because I can see your face. We're on video. I can see your face, and the listeners can't. And as you were saying, maybe I could begin to think about what I want. Your shoulders kind of went up, and your eyes kind of went up. Like, is that okay? Is that an okay thing to begin doing? Because now you are beginning to live with the hope of a future instead of the expectation of impending death. And I can see in you that it felt like a really fragile place. Do I go there? Do I dare do that? After all of these years of living with this gray mass, because it's metaphorical for this thing that was hanging over your life the whole time.
Massive cloud.
And I just wanted to share that with the listeners that you could just see in you the true tension of, is it okay to go ahead and start hoping and living in a different way?
Yeah. Can I choose? Do I have a choice? And this was the massive thing in my life, is having the choice taken away from me. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, do I dare pick something I want? Do I dare to have a dog again? Because if, I lived with maybe not knowing whether I'd be able to provide for the poor dog or have a relationship. Is it worth putting effort into something but now I have a choice. So I finally made some decisions, and I think that's what I have gained. Skydiving was very good for make a quick decision, because as you're falling, you have 45 to 50 seconds to make a decision. So I now make decisions about what do I want in my life. So what I decided, one thing was that, all right then, I'm going to move back to Canada where it is somewhat near my family. I have friends here. I gave up the job that I'd had for 30 years, which was pretty much learning and development. I was doing a lot of communication training, and a lot of what I dealt with was people who were very angry and very toxic. And I was very good at it because I felt angry and toxic. So I did training on how to not communicate with that. But the thing is, being around angry and toxic all the time was painful. So I thought, no, I'm going to do something with my skills and abilities that I now have an ability to do. So I actually went back and did training. I gave up learning and development. I trained to be a life cycle celebrant, which I didn't even know what that was initially. It's someone who actually writes, designs, and delivers personalized ceremonies for people that are going through some kind of movement or change in their life. And a lot of that is weddings, when people get married. So I became an ordained minister and a wedding officiant. So I actually do ceremonies for people that are getting married in movement. I marry people in helicopters. I marry people in yachts. There's some kind of movement going on, which for me, that's a metaphorical thing about being able to take change and make it purposeful and celebrate it. I also do celebrations for people who are retiring or they're adopting a rescue dog. But what I want and what I think is important for me is to mark the positive changes in people's life and not just let them go by and give them meaning.
What makes that especially important to you, given your experience? What is it about marking those moments that we can prioritize and emphasize differently as people who haven't experienced what you've done?
It's not letting them just go by and not give them weight. Because by marking something that's really, really important, that is a positive change in your life, that gives you an anchor. It makes you feel you have something in your life that gives you direction. It's like I needed direction in my life or positive markers. And the thing is, that's what I thought maybe I could help other people with that. And it's the most wonderful thing. Like, for instance, I did a celebration for two people getting married who were, one of them was very ill. She had cancer and she had a terminal diagnosis, still has a terminal diagnosis. But I helped them see that they could marry now and celebrate now what they have because you don't know. No one has a guarantee, but you have a choice as to how you live and living, facing the fears that you have and taking what is valuable and marking it as significant. It's helped me immensely, and I think I'm able to help others, which is another thing I gained. I've spent so much of my life in my own head. It feels very selfish. It feels very indulgent, self-indulgent to always be me, worry, sick, dying, Finally, now I can look outward and use what I have to be able to help and not be thinking about my own stuff.
It's just, I mean, this conversation could go on for days. I could just, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I'm so thankful that you're sharing the story. What you just said about that anchor piece and marking the moments, I'm just going to risk making a conclusion out of that one and see if it works for you or not. And you can correct it if it's wrong. But it seems like marking those moments is especially important for you because over those 35 years of the incorrect diagnosis, you're really a woman on the run, weren't you?
Definitely.
Reacting, running, managing the fear, I mean, it seems like that timeline wasn't punctuated by those moments to stop and appreciate and create a milepost and to is that accurate that you're sort of on the run for those 35 years and now you see the value looking back of going, wait a second, this moment matters.
Yeah, hold on. Hold on. I think the one most important thing that I live with every single day is live as if you only have 6 months. Because I think that will force you to not wait. Because the waiting is what killed me. Waiting around. Live. What if you only had 6 months? Would you marry the person you loved? Would you celebrate something? Would you move to another country? Would you do something which I used to think was inappropriate, but it's actually choosing something that may not be the acceptable choice, but it's your choice. And I think you should celebrate the high points. And looking back, I had some wonderful high points. Do I regret anything when I look back? Yes. I regret not having children. I regret not giving more to relationships because I didn't think I could. But I regret not having more security, and knowing what I have in the future. But I do not regret living how I lived. I had the most wonderful things happen and I mark them in my own mind. That first parachute jump before, not the sheep one, but when I was falling and looking down and thinking, it's all perspective, and I love the feeling of flying. I used to dream that I could fly as a child. I used to dream I could jump out my bedroom window and fly to school. And Absolutely, falling in free fall at 120 miles an hour does feel like you are flying and not falling. And that's kind of the metaphor for me about what I do now. That's why I love celebrating people in movement, like going up above Kelowna a couple of months ago in a helicopter and marrying the two people, first of all, in the helicopter, but then on a mountaintop. Live like you're going to die in 6 months.
And you like that 6 month time frame because that's actionable for us who haven't had your experience.
Yeah,
We can actually, build that into our lives as a practice to say, if today I'm struggling with a decision, if I only had 6 months, that time frame really worked. I mean, you literally had that time frame, but in retrospect, you're saying it's actually a useful time frame
yeah.
to force on yourself. Okay.
It's actually very useful because, people who have things like, I think right now people are struggling with worrying about future. And I think one of the most helpful things to people that are worrying is pull it back. Pull it back to a manageable time frame. And people, just today, what am I going to do today to set myself up for tomorrow? I will go for a walk. What do I want that makes me happier? Go for a walk with your significant other. Do something that you actually feel that contributes to your day. And don't worry about 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future. Just pull it back. And that's maybe the main thing that I'm surviving with. And like you said, 6 months is reasonable. It's for me, it's great. It's looking a little bit into the future. It's saying, what can I do to maybe financially support myself for 6 months? And then hopefully not have the fear at the end of it.
The fear piece, you said something about how when the fear showed up, you would immediately pull your terminal diagnosis in and go, fear, you're not going to get to have your way right now because I've got this terminal thing coming. So step aside. And I know in my own struggles with anxiety around unfounded medical and catastrophic things, I've recently found that to be really helpful too, to go, wait a second, I could sit here and try to deal with the anxiety, or I could go, but I really will die someday and it could be soon. I don't have time to deal with you, anxiety. And I'm not a clinician. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know if that passes muster in terms of all the science, but I do know that experientially, when I'm able to go, you know what, anxiety, I really don't have time for that right now. And then I move. I mean, you've talked a lot about movement. And then I move from that place of mental and emotional stuckness and go do, it breaks the grip and I'm able to keep moving again.
Exactly. It's breaking the grip and it's taking it because it's staring you right in the face and it's actually in the way of what you're doing. And if you can push it aside, you can take a step forward. And if you feel you have even one incremental step towards something else, then you feel like you have more control over your life and that it's not controlling you. And it's a really fascinating thing to push it away because it doesn't go away. And, death is one of those things we cannot avoid. It's the one thing that we know is there, and yet we have this massive fear of it. And the one thing that really struck me a couple of years ago, my grandmother developed pancreatic cancer, and she died. Got ill very, very quickly, and my mother took care of her towards the end. And my grandmother kept trying to get out of bed and saying she had to pack. She had to pack for where she was going because she was afraid to go there without clean underwear. And to me it was like, wait a minute.
There are big issues at stake. Right?
But fear is an interesting thing, whether you're afraid of not bringing the correct things, but fear is inevitable. And I think for me, the way I finally became not friends with it, we're not best friends, but we're equals. It is not bigger than me. I am not bigger than it. It is equals. I will work with you, but don't be trying to overstep your bounds.
So cool.
It's a funny way of looking at it, maybe not for everybody, but.
And for those who are listening who aren't dealing, I mean, you were dealing with a literal life and death issue for all of those years where the enemy was impending death. But for someone who maybe is not dealing with that kind of an issue, but wondering, do I take this job? Do I make this leap? Do I rekindle this relationship? How do we apply the lessons that you've learned in situations that aren't life and death, but are fear inducing nonetheless? What do you do in that moment?
That's it's the same thing. I pull it back. Okay, we all have choices in life, lots and lots and lots of choices. And I apply two things to it now. If I had 6 months to live, what would I choose? And that's the choice. If you choose the more sensible job or whether you choose a job that gives you more enjoyment but is less financially secure. At the end of that 6 months, would you look back and say, "Oh, I'm so glad I have an extra $500 in the bank," or "My God, did I enjoy doing that?" And that's, I think, the choices that we make. Choice is everything. But choose one that if you had 6 months, what would you choose? And not to be afraid anymore, because it is going to be inevitable, but we may as well not just wait for that, but fill the time with things that you enjoy and choose to be with you between that time.
And I love what you said about how the fear never goes away, and of course our mortality never goes away. And something I've begun to get persuaded about is that trying to make them go away, we actually do more harm than good. And when we can, like you said, you don't necessarily befriend or become buddy buddy, but you let that reality into the room. I am afraid. Okay. How much sway does fear get to have in my life at this moment? Because you have a choice in the matter. And gosh, in unbelievable ways, you've demonstrated the power of choice. I mean, to the point that you're jumping out of planes, facing a deep fear of yours, and deciding whether or not every jump you're going to pull the cord. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, I don't recommend that for everybody, obviously.
Okay, what do you recommend?
Well, I do recommend, everyone's afraid of so many things in your life. If I'm afraid of going outside and walking right now, I'm afraid of speaking in public, I'm afraid of changing jobs because it might be insecure. If I change jobs now, is that a safe option in a difficult circumstance? And if I now believe if you identify fear, you turn and face it. Because I swear, if you run away from something you're afraid of, it turns out to track you. I remember jumping out of airplanes and I was terribly afraid of hitting pointy trees. Pointy trees, for some reason, were the thing that really got me. So what I would do is I would say, avoid pointy tree, avoid pointy tree. And I would jump out and I would look for the pointy tree because I wanted to avoid it. But subconsciously, you are orienting yourself towards the pointy tree.
By giving it that much attention, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So then what I finally learned is, okay, pointy tree, but focus on the direction you're going and face it. So anything that you find that you're afraid of, face it. Maybe don't choose to do anything about it, but face it and say, what exactly am I afraid of if I go speak in public, if I lead a class or a group on something? Well, everyone might think I'm really stupid and that I don't know what I'm talking about, but in 6 months, will that really matter? I think it gives me a really good view of what will I be the proudest of in 6 months. And then maybe the next 6 months, I'll have to rethink what the next 6 months is.
So when we resist the fear and try to get away from it, it's like the fear can smell the fear and it starts tracking you down, huh? And it makes it worse. So face it.
Exactly. And it
Yeah.
starts tapping you on the shoulder. So turn around, say
Yeah.
hello, shake his hand, or not. Don't
Right.
fist bump. Maybe do an elbow bump, but don't avoid
And
it.
it's perfect for right now because the whole world, by degrees, is in the grips of this pandemic fear and really having to wrestle with some of these issues of mortality and security and control in ways that none of us would care to. But hey, here we are. We're having to do that. And your message is timely. I would never want someone to have to travel the road that you've traveled, but you have traveled it. And thank you for bringing your story to serve us because it's a perspective that none of us could gain had you not given us the opportunity to see it through your eyes. And I'm curious for you, you still have a really challenging physical thing to deal with. How is that going? How are you doing with that in this new chapter of your life?
You know, I moved here to Kelowna 6 months ago, and I have been working on trying to incorporate things that help. I'm taking the lesson that I learned on that cruise ship, for example. If you don't walk and if you lie down and don't move, it gets a lot worse. So the challenge I have right now is, of course, not being able to go outside, not being able to exercise much. But that's another great thing about having a rescue dog. I am forced to go out and walk him, or he will pee on the carpet. So I'm trying to keep myself mobile, I'm trying to make sure I build relationships rather than avoid them. I have a doctor finally. It took me a long time to get one that I really like. They're trying to help me with the chronic pain issues and the things that deteriorate. And I'm trying to not focus on the health aspect. I'm trying to just say, what do I want in my life? And what I have really found a joy in, I've forgotten about joy. Joy is something I never had time to have because I was busy running. I absolutely love being part of, say, two people getting married where I feel what they feel. They have hope for the future. They have hope and joy for the future. They are feeling positive, they're looking forward, and there's no fear is not part of the equation. So that's one thing I've brought into my life now. And 6 months, that's what I try and work on. And I'm really, really enjoying what I do. And I'm just trying to deal with my physical issues and just try to, I probably will always be someone who tries to displace it with something else. I just don't like focusing on what I can't do. I'm trying to focus on now what I can do and trying to figure out how to make life a little bit more secure in the next couple of months. Instead of having no pension, I will never be able to retire, for instance, because I haven't ever built anything ahead. But it's okay. I'm learning just worry about 6 months. Don't worry about when you're 90.
Well, you're going to retire on your memoir that you're going to write, and that I'm going to buy and hand out to thousands of people. So
Yes.
you're going to retire on your memoir. So here's the $1,000,000 question, and I want to try and ask it in a way that makes sense and that you can handle okay. And that's and on the one hand, it feels like a silly and even a foolish question, but I think it's the question we all want to ask, which is, if you could go back and get the right diagnosis at 15 or at 25, if that was an option, would you?
I've asked myself that question a lot. And, we are the people we are because of what happens to us and how we react to it. And for a long time, I said, absolutely, I would change it. Absolutely, I would do some things differently. However, looking back, I think who I am now is based on what I've struggled with. The understanding I have for other people in pain or dealing with fear is because of living it. I don't think I would have lived that. I don't think I would have understood that. So I look back and I try not to think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. It's the shoulding on yourselves. Should. I wish I should have done that. I would have liked a more clear diagnosis. Maybe I could have accomplished different things, but I don't think I've accomplished less. I think I have always tried very hard to accomplish a lot because I thought I had limited time. And I like that now. I do that now because it's been cemented into me. Strive for something better, try something new. And I probably wouldn't be that way if I hadn't actually had all of that.
I'm just thrilled to be sitting here talking to you now that you have a new chapter to your story. You thought the story was going to end in 6 months increments for 40 years.
Yeah,
And
really.
I mean, how remarkable for the sun to be coming out, that cloud to be lifting, and you still have challenges, of course, but you're risking now living with hope, and you're incorporating the lessons from that first chapter. And I really do look forward to the memoir. It'd be a powerful story. If you don't want to write it, get a ghostwriter. Maybe we'll collaborate on. I don't know, but it's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing it. And in the show notes today, of course, I'll share information for how to contact Lise, and if you want to learn more about her story. Thank you for being here. For those of you listening, I want you to remember that you are going to die, but you're not dead yet. So tap into the power of your mortality to become the person you are made to be and live the life you are made to live. Thanks, Lise.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be asked for this story.
It's only the start. Many more people need to hear it. Wow. Lise's story is like a sadistic experiment designed by a mad scientist. And the question posed by the experiment was, what does the expectation of imminent death do to a person? If there was any remaining doubt that mortality is the most powerful motivator in life, then Lise's story helps put that doubt to rest. Even though she has regret over things she missed, investing more in intimate relationships and having kids, for example, she still is grateful overall for how death caused her to live. So much so that she is carrying those lessons forward into the new chapter of her story. And one idea sticks out to me especially, that even though there's no guarantee of another day, we do have a choice about how we live right now. In Lise's case, she chose to go for it rather than hole up and wait for death. What choice are you making? What hit you from Lise's story? Share your response in the comments on this episode's post on Facebook at Andrew Petty Coach. My purpose as a coach is to help you deploy your unique purpose in the world. Connect with me on Facebook or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. So glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.